Everyone, and welcome to week 5. I know it says week 4 on the screen, but this is week 5. We're going over the week 4 assignments, and then we'll get started on the week 5 material, and I'm introducing all of this. No, this is week 5, according to the lesson material. I know it's been longer than that. Okay. For those of you who are online and listening, there was a student who brought up that technically this is week 6, and they are right, but as far as the lesson material is concerned, it's the lesson material from week 5 as it was originally laid out. All right, so we're on the week 5 material, and we're going to be reviewing the week 4 material. Got it. Good. Something. All right. Let's go ahead and go over the previous problems. Last time we were able to do question 1, but we weren't able to do 2 through 4, so let's go ahead and cover those. Question 2, which of the cases are freed from their connection to the main verb when preceded by a preposition?
Is it an answer with 3?
There are 3.
Yay, I got it right then. It's genitive, dative, and accusative.
Genitive, dative, and accusative is absolutely correct. Now, technically, the genitive isn't really connected to the main verb anyways, except very tangentially. So it's a little bit weird that way, but it's still technically something that can be ruled by a preposition. Or technically, it rules the preposition. But yes, those 3 are the answer. Genitive, accusative, dative, some combination thereof, you're good to go. Number 3, how can you tell if a referring word goes with a particular noun? And it should match it, and this is another answer that has 3 things. It will match it in these 3 ways.
If it matches in case, number, and gender?
Case, number, and gender.
So it has to have all 3.
Normally it has to have all 3. Like in any language, there's always exceptions. And in the lesson from last time, I think I mentioned what the major exception was.
You did. I'll have to go back and find it again, but you did mention it.
Yeah. It's never what we want to think about because that just makes things all the more complicated, but there is technically an exception.
Okay. Where was that?
Yeah, but case, number, and gender is normally what you're going to have when referring words are related to each other. But there's one type of referring word that doesn't always match entirely.
Pronouns.
It is pronouns, yep. Pronouns, there are some pronouns, and we might get into discussing them this week or not, depending on how much time we have, but there are some pronouns that have no gender. Just like in English, if you say I, you could say it as a woman, you could say it as a man. I don't think a fish would say it, but you know. But you could say it as a man or a woman, and it would be perfectly appropriate. It doesn't have a gender attached to it. So personal pronouns in Greek, some of the personal pronouns do, some of the personal pronouns don't have gender, so that's a little bit weird. And then some pronouns, like all pronouns in different languages, will float around as far as what their case is. And so case can sometimes be a little up in the air, gender can be up in the air, depending on the kind of pronoun that you're talking about. Okay. But we'll get into that. It's specific on which ones are which.
Okay.
All right. So, but the main point was case, number, gender. Those are the 3 things you're normally looking for. That's what you want to hold on to. Case, number, gender. Number 4, why is it incorrect to translate the Greek deterministic relative pronoun as just is? And this one I'm actually really interested to see what you guys came up with.
Well, I just simply said because they are used in such a wide variety of ways.
I basically said the same thing too.
Found those words in my notes.
I did too. Okay, did we make it too simple this time?
This was a little too simple, yeah.
Okay, well, let's see.
It is used in a wide variety of ways. I'll definitely give you that, but that doesn't really address why you can't use a verb of being with it, though. It is still a fairly straightforward answer, but most people aren't going to think of it because they're thinking too hard.
Is it incorrect to translate?
Yep, you guys are thinking way too hard.
Thinking too hard.
You're thinking way too hard. A determiner is not a verb. That's why.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's all there is to it.
Because a determiner is not a verb.
Yep, that's it. Yeah. It's a deterministic relative pronoun. It's not a verb, so you can't translate it as if it was a verb. Now you might need to put in verbs to help it out, but you can't do it as just a verb because it's not just a verb.
That's right. is a verb of being.
It is.
In the English language.
Mm-hmm.
So it
And then
can be a determiner.
exactly, and vice versa. Yeah, you can throw it in there to help you make sense of the determiner, but by itself, it's not going to be that.
Okay.
You're in the right
Come
class.
on, Kristen. Define is.
Yeah, about that.
Uh-huh.
Statement. Okay.
That's okay. My YouTube channel is under an education license, so I'm not sure where exactly political comments fit on that, but
Yeah.
all right. And then we have the translation task, and these are what we're aiming at in this course is so that we can actually go through and do some translation. But when you first come to it, it's kind of like the transition from going from a normal paved road onto ice. You just kind of careen out of control to start with until you kind of get used to it. And that's what happens. So let's go through and figure out what we have here. So for the first one, all of these are sentences, which is kind of nice. So you have some kind of an idea of what's going on. But the first one, like with all of them, you're always going to want to look at the verb first. Okay. And I was somewhat nice in these ones. I wasn't as nice as I was in previous ones, but I was somewhat nice in that at least gave you the verbs. So the verb is. It is. Yeah. It is actually is. That is the verb. And with any verb, we're going to be asking ourselves, who is, responsible for the action, what is being acted on, those kinds of things. And with verbs of being, like is, there really is nothing so much that's being acted on. There's usually just two things that are being equated to each other. And so both of them will actually wind up being the nominative. Normally it would be nominative, verb, accusative, basically subject, verb, object like we're used to in English. That's what we'd be looking for. But with verbs of being, everything takes on the nominative because they're being equated to each other. But in English, we still have to figure out what is actually primary, what goes first. And the way that we do that is we figure out which of those two nominative nouns there, because both the theos and the agape are both nominative. To figure out which one of those is primary, which one of those is going to go in front of the is, we say which one has the definite article. And it is the theos. Theos has the definite, it's called the definite article, the deterministic relative pronoun, the DRP. Theos is the one that has the DRP. It's nominative singular masculine. Theos is nominative singular masculine. So those two go together. They match each other in case, number, and gender.
It's the determiner.
Yeah, right? The determiner, okay. The DRP, the definite article, the article. It gets called 1,000 different things, which just makes it all the more confusing for students.
Yes.
But even Mounce does it as well, so I'm kind of stuck with it. Because he calls it the determiner in the interlinear, but he calls it the article in the compact guide, and it's just.
Yeah.
And if you read something that's more formal on it, it's going to be the deterministic relative pronoun. So yeah, it's just all over the place on that one. But if you have a verb of being there and you have multiple nominatives, you look for the one that has the determiner, the one that has the DRP. All right, and then this one, depending on how you wanted to translate it and where you got your translation material from, if you went with the little lexical guide that I gave you guys, you would probably use the word great. If you use the standard references that Mounce provides, which is just fine, you would use God. So you would have he who is God, or you would have the great one with a DRP elevation. Either one is appropriate. I don't really care which one you do at this point, just so long as you're relatively consistent with it so you don't mess yourself up later. I'm going to use my preferred one. I'm going to say the great one for hotheos.
Okay.
I prefer to think of it as an adjective, even though it usually functions as a noun.
But both are correct. Right?
Both are acceptable. Correct is always one of those weird things with language because it's more like levels of correct. How precise are you trying to take across what they're saying? It's that issue of translation. Is this what this person said? Well, yes, to a certain extent. It might not be said in the exact same way that they said it. They may have said it very formally, but I went over and told the guy, hey, get the move the car. He might have said something much more polite, like, would you please tell that gentleman to remove his vehicle from the premises? You translate it across and say, get your car out of here.
Get out of here.
Exactly. So that's why I'm always...
still getting across.
The message is still getting across, but there's always that question of how accurately are you reflecting what the original person intended. It's kind of like the difference between using Bible translation, something like the Message, which would be more like, get your car out of here, or something that's much more formal like the NASB, which is, good sir, would you please remove the vehicle from the premises? Yeah.
Not many of us speak that way.
Not many of us speak that way, but the question is, what was the original person trying to say? Were they trying to say it formally, or were they trying to speak hick?
Yes, speak.
And that changes with the different authors of the New Testament. There are some of them that are incredibly formal in the way they speak. Luke, for example, is usually pretty formal. Paul is pretty formal as well. Paul does this weird stream of consciousness thing where he'll just kind of do this weird run-on thing, but he's still fairly formal in the words that he uses. And then you get others that are not like that at all. You get the Apostle John, for example, and his sentence structure is very precise but simple at the same time. He has a very specific meaning in mind, but he uses very simple words to do it.
As well, okay.
And so translating John is actually really difficult because his concepts are so deep, but his words are so simple. It's hard to accurately reflect him.
Okay.
Yeah. And it, like I said, it just depends on how far you want to go with it. There's the basic message, move the car.
I'm good with it.
But then there's, how is it that they said move the car?
To know the emphasis on how you should be looking at things.
Yeah. And in English, when it comes to theos, we usually translate it as God just because that's a concept that English-speaking people are familiar with. Is that technically what the original authors of the New Testament meant? I would argue that it's actually a little bit different.
Probably not. Okay.
The Great One is more accurate to what they would have in mind. Now, as far as basic meaning is concerned, it's, 6 and 1, half a dozen and the other. It's more so an issue of register and things like that.
Would it be more of a respect thing, giving that honor when they say the Great One?
Yeah. When they say the Great One, they're coming at it, of course, from a Hebrew point of view. And so they're recognizing God as the one who is above all else. We come at it from actually a very Greek point of view instead of a very Hebrew point of view. And I'm talking about Greek culture. I'm not talking about the language. But we come at it from a very Greek culture perspective where there are tons of gods and all these different things. And he is, kind of the main one, but he's not. But we link it to that idea. We link this God to all of those other gods. For a Hebrew person, though, they wouldn't make that connection. This God over here has nothing to do with all those other gods. All those other gods are false and fake. So their concept of the Great One makes that distinction a little bit more strongly.
I see.
Whereas we kind of borrow a very generic term and put a capital on it to make it specific.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. But like I said, that's really getting into nuts and bolts of it. As far as the basic meaning, if you want to say he who, if you want to say the Great One versus he who is God, 6 and 1, half a dozen and other as far as basic meaning is concerned.
Okay.
So I'll do the formal thing, but you guys can do whatever you choose to do on that one. So the Great One would be what would be in front of the verb, and then you have is. So the Great One is, and then agape, what did we find out that means?
Agape.
Yeah.
Love.
Love.
Love. Yep.
Basically love.
Yeah.
There was other words, but that was kind of the...
That's kind of the main idea. Yeah. And, that wonderful principle of keep things relatively simple if you can, which is always kind of a hard thing in this class, but yeah. The Great One is love. Moving on. Yeah. The Great One is love. And the fact that it is theos that gets the determiner on this is actually fairly important for figuring out what it means. Because a lot of people, when they read this, especially in English translation, because we'll usually just translate it as God is love. We don't usually put the determiner on there, which is kind of sad. But yeah, the Great One is love. In Greek, the meaning is a little bit more specific. In English, we usually read it and say, God is love. And then we do this really weird thing where we decide that, we get to determine what love is. God is love. And I, as a loving person, would never send anyone to hell. Therefore, since God is love, he wouldn't send anyone to hell either. It's not the best logic. What the Greek is actually getting at is, in saying that ha theos, where it has that determiner on there, is it's actually saying that this is what defines that. God defines love.
What love is.
Yeah.
The great one
Is love. He is what love is. He defines love. So you can't take your own definition of love or your own standard of love and apply it to God, because he doesn't care what your standard is. His standard matters.
Yes.
And that one's hard for a lot of people to get through their heads, because we always like it when God meets us on our terms. And that's one of those things where I said, and that was from the Apostle John. Fairly simple words. It's just 4 words in Greek. But the concept there is huge. And that's just the Apostle John for you. Very simple phrases, but very deep deep meanings.
And this is a John phrase, basically, right?
Yeah, that first one was from the Apostle John. All right, and then, so first one we said, the great one is love. Number 16, we had quite a bit more going on with that one. We do have the verb, made. So we have kind of something to focus ourselves on, and we need, of course, something before the verb, after the verb, to make a nice, neat sentence in it. And of course, all of this is prefaced by in beginning, so we can leave that in the beginning if you want to, or you can throw it at the end, and in English it's not going to matter too much. But we need to know who's doing the making, and that's going to be the thing that's in the nominative. And again, that's ha theos. So he who is God, the great one, made. So God is doing the making here. And then we ask ourselves, well, what did he make? That's where the accusative comes in. And we actually have a lot of things that are in the accusative here. We have ton, uranon. That's one set of things that are in the accusative, and those are both masculine, so they'll go together. And then we have another set of things that are accusative, and that's tain, gain, and those are both feminine, so they'll go together. And you'll usually want to look at the nouns first before you'll look at the other stuff. So uranon, what did we find out that meant when we looked up 4041?
Heaven.
Heaven. Yep. And we are going to leave it as heaven because this is singular, not plural. So we're just going to leave it as heaven. And then gain, what did we find out that meant?
Earth.
Earth could also mean land. A lot of times in the New Testament, I would argue that it more properly means land than it means earth. But this is Old Testament, so that doesn't really apply. Because I literally just went back to the first verse and grabbed that. That's the nice thing about the Hebrews doing the translation of their Hebrew Old Testament into Greek, is if you need an example of something, you can just pull it from there, and it's great. Yeah. So yeah, it's fantastic. So that's actually Genesis 1:1 in Greek, via the Hebrew translation in the Septuagint. But so going through and putting it all together, we have the great one made the heaven and the earth in the beginning. Or you can say in the beginning, he who is great. No, you want to say he who is great, but the great one made the heaven and the earth. Make sure you get that NRK in there, though, the in the beginning part. And you'll notice that in English we put in the beginning, but in Greek there is no the between the N and the RK.
What does it say?
It just says NRK.
Yeah.
In beginning.
In beginning.
It doesn't have in the beginning.
We added the
In beginning.
for flow.
We add the in there for flow, but it's not actually a part of the original text. And this happens a lot in prepositional phrases, is the article will just get dropped. It doesn't show up. Sometimes it does in prepositional phrases, but most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time in prepositional phrases, you'll have to supply your own article.
Okay.
And that actually really messed me up when I was first learning how to translate, because I was trying to be very literalistic, which is a good thing. But realizing that, not all languages treat articles the same way is a big thing. And most languages don't treat articles the same way that we do in English. It's a concept that just does not come across.
And what's an article? I'm sorry.
The, a, an, yeah. And of course there's the Greek article, which gives us all the fits. It's the determiner, which can be translated as the, or he who is, those which are,
Okay.
those who are.
Those are yes, the company words that make a flow.
Yes.
Just
yes.
flowing words.
All right. And then in 17, we have Eucharisto, to theo, mu, pantate, which means absolutely nothing, so we have to actually look things up.
It means something, but
It means something, but it just doesn't mean a whole lot to us at this point. So you start out looking at the verb first, and it says, I give thanks. And the reason why I always suggest that people look at the verb first is because sometimes the verbs have an implied pronoun in them. And if they do have an implied pronoun, that pronoun is going to be the nominative. It's going to be the thing responsible for the action. So don't go looking for a nominative because it might already have it. In this case, it does have an implied pronoun, the I. I give thanks. So we already have the nominative. We know who's responsible for the giving thanks. We know who it is that is giving thanks. It's I, whoever that I is, but I give thanks. After that, we would normally look for the accusative. I give thanks. Well, there is no accusative on this one, and that's just because of the type of verb it is. Yeah. Giving thanks in Greek does not really take on an accusative. Because you usually give thanks to someone, you don't give thanks on someone or through someone, which would just be weird. Mm-hmm. So it's usually to someone, and since it's to someone or for someone, that's dative. Mm-hmm. So then we would look at the dative, and we have to, the O. And this is yet another form of the ha, the os. So we know it's going to be the Great One, or He who is God. But it's dative, so we have to throw in a helping word. And we have lots of different helping words that you can use with datives, but the most common helping words are either to or for. In this context, it would make more sense to say to. Yeah, usually in Greek, when you want to say on behalf of someone, I want to give thanks, for this great meal or something that I have, they'll usually actually throw in an extra preposition that will say on behalf of or because of or something like that. Oh. So that usually won't be the dative by itself. There'll usually be a preposition, an actual preposition in Greek involved in that. Okay, so we know who we're giving the thanks to, but that giving of thanks is being modified by a genitive there. Mu, which either means basically I or me, and it's genitive. So the helping words there are going to be of or from. So it'll be the Great One of me, basically. Or if you wanted to take out the, you could say my Great One. Yeah. And a lot of times people will do that. They'll take out the article and they'll just move the genitive up in front, because that makes more sense in English.
Okay, so I give thanks to my Great One, always?
Yeah, you could do that.
That's what I'm doing too. I like that better than to the Great One of me.
Yes, better.
And then, of course, pantate, we actually saw that in one of our much, much earlier lessons, but that's the adverb always. So I give thanks to the Great One of me always, or I give thanks to my God always, or something like that.
Okay. So the of me could be...
You could put the of me after the Great One, and that would preserve the Greek order. If you want it to make more sense in English, you would usually change the of me into my and put it out in front.
Okay.
So I give thanks to my Great One.
Okay, there we go.
Always.
Yeah. Okay. But the of me is more correct as far as Greek.
As far as preserving the Greek order, it's more correct.
Okay.
Although you really have to change the way you think of the word of, because in English it can mean quite a few different things.
Yes, exactly.
In the Greek genitive, it's more specific.
Yes.
All right, and then finally on 18, makari oi, hoi, dedi og menoi.
Sure.
3 words in Greek. Entire, but it is a complete sentence. I gave you the first one. It's an adjective, blessed. And then I also gave you a helping verb to fill it in. And actually in this lesson, I'll explain why you need that helping verb in there and how you know when they show up and when they don't. But a lot of times where you'll have an adjective that's by itself, it doesn't have a determiner or anything in front of it, and then you have something later on or something like that, you'll usually have to wind up putting in some kind of a helping verb. And then I also told you what the verb was, persecuted, and it's passive. So instead of saying who is doing the persecuting, when we look at the nominative, it's going to be who is responsible not who is responsible for it, but who is being persecuted. And that's the thing in the nominative, that's the hoi, which is a determiner. So this is standing in for what is being persecuted. And so we looked through some options to make that make sense. And there's a few different ways that you could translate it that I actually think would be decent. What are some ways that you guys came up with of translating that determiner there?
Determiner, which one was the determiner? The 38, 36?
Those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those.
Blessed are those
who are.
Those who are. Yeah, you'd have to have all three words on that one. Those who are. Blessed are those who are persecuted. That would be a good way to do it. What's another way you could do it? I like that one, though. Blessed are those who are persecuted. That would be, I like that one. That's a good one. That's valid. But there is other ways you could do it.
Let me see here.
Those who are persecuted are blessed. Change the word order.
Yeah, you could do that, and some translators would. That wasn't what I was getting at. I was more so getting at the determiner. But yes, it is an option.
I don't know. I can't think of
You could just say, blessed are the persecuted.
Oh,
Oh, that's true.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, you could do DRP elevation and say, blessed are the persecuted ones.
Oh, you know what? Because that is one of the actions. Oh, yeah, duh. Okay, too simple.
Yeah.
There it is on my paper even.
Yeah. So yeah, there's different ways you can do it. And when it comes to the DRP, you'll find passages where you're looking at it and say, you know, I could do this, and it means basically the same thing as if I did this one over here, and just pick one that you like and go with it. Okay, if it doesn't really significantly impact the meaning, I really don't care.
Because it's a determiner, it can be flexible.
Yeah, the Greek concept of the determiner is basically something that introduces a noun phrase, and so it's a really nebulous concept. That's really all that it does. Taking it across into English is the hard part, but the Greek concept is actually fairly straightforward. It just introduces a noun phrase. But for us, making it actually mean something in English, that's where it can be in all this big list of things, and you just contextually kind of have to figure out something that's going to work for it. Pretty much. This will work to get the idea across, yeah. All right, so that is the main thrust of the assignment. In class, I can't really go over the reading assignment with you. I mean, we'll be talking about that less in adjectives and pronouns, so we'll kind of get there on that, but can't really do that in class. Now let's go ahead and read it all together. I hated that in school. Did you guys get that in school? You do the round robin reading. Okay, everybody gets a paragraph.
I do.
Yeah.
And I pull sticks out so they don't know who's coming.
Yeah, there you go.
Catch them off guard.
Pay attention, pay attention.
That's right.
Yeah. And then 20, use the word list on the next page to study your first set of Koine Greek words, which probably none of us did, but they are there for when you want to come back to them and you want to build your vocabulary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And once you do get the vocabulary down, you'll have about 3/4 of the Greek New Testament in. But that is probably going to be, we'll say future tense for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's so smart.
All right, so let's get into the actual lesson for today.
A quiz?
Yep, there will be a quiz.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the slides, so it's going to come up either way.
On the paper too.
Yep. All right, so this lesson will be on adjectives and pronouns, but before we do that, let's do the review quiz. 5 questions as normal. Number 5 is the bonus. Go ahead and I'll read through these relatively quickly, I hope. Number 1. Which of the following cases will not be used to determine the meaning of a preposition? And there are 2 correct answers on this one. If you do either or if you get both of them, that's great. I'm not going to count it double if you get both of them, though, just saying.
Okay.
But there are 2 possible correct answers on there. Another way of phrasing the question is, okay, there are 3 cases that can be tied to a preposition. There are 2 that never will be. You're looking for the 2 that will not ever be tied to the preposition.
And I know one of them right off the bat.
Yeah. Yeah, there are 2 cases that are never going to be tied to a preposition as far as determining the meaning of the preposition is concerned.
Okay.
Yep.
So,
Oh, here I wrote the words down.
I think I got that right. Okay, so it's the opposite of a...
Quit giving people cheat sheet answers. All right, and then number 2, a word that goes with the noun will usually match it in case article gender, or case number gender. This has to do with the whole referring word thing. If you have a referring word, it's usually going to match what it's referring to in these following ways.
That's the referring word one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Referring words will match what they're referring to in these ways.
Okay.
All right, then number 3, what is the case of the word a in the sentence, the bird ate a fish? So the a before the a fish, what is its case going to be? Is it nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, or vocative? And I can't really think of a whole lot of good hints on this that wouldn't just completely give it away, so you're kind of stuck on that one. We could refresh our memory on what some of these are. The nominative is responsible for the action.
Okay.
Who is responsible for the action?
Yeah, is the nominative. Accusative is what is receiving the action.
Okay.
And then the dative receives the thing that's in the accusative. Genitive shows possession or derivation. And then vocative is who are you talking to.
So it's not valid at all.
Okay. So
A fish. Those way. Okay. Oh, I got my answer. I could be wrong. I got my answer.
okay, I need to. Where do I find those definitions again?
Shh.
Okay.
Students passing notes
I
in
made me a
class.
cheat sheet.
I need to do
I made me
this.
a card. It's not a cheat sheet. I lay these out when I'm doing my homework.
This is what we like to call the life preserver.
Yes.
That was one thing that always surprised me when I was teaching. I'd go over really complicated math concepts with some of my students, in the upper grade levels. And you'd have some students that would never take any notes on anything. They just sit there and listen. It's like, how do you plan on getting through anything? It's just, well, I memorize it all. Well, your test scores don't say that you memorize it all.
I might be wrong, but this one, I think I'm kind of confused, but we'll see.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, and then number 4, is it appropriate to translate the deterministic relative pronoun, the DRP, as just the word was? A, yes. B, no. C, sometimes. D, only after transition therapy.
I like D. What do you think?
I think that was good.
And we actually did discuss this a little bit. You guys were thinking really, really, really hard about the deterministic relative pronoun. And last time in the homework it was with the word is.
Yes.
And you guys, you were talking about stuff that was related to the lesson, but you'd made it harder than it needed to be.
Well, is present tense. Was is past tense.
But still a verb of being.
Yes, true.
So you're basically asking, why cannot the DRP be a verb? Or why can't it? Or why should it? Or why shouldn't it?
So are you still at number 4?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I accidentally gave away the answer, but
Discussing
yeah.
and discussing it.
Well, did you give it away?
Yes, I did.
Okay, well, okay.
Yep. And then the bonus question is pretty easy. You pull out the parsing code. You see how many sections are divided by the big solid lines,
That one's pretty easy.
and you count it out.
Okay, do what?
How many sections are in that parsing code?
Oh, that was.
He gave us an easy one.
Yeah.
How many sections are divided by big bold lines?
Well,
Not the little lines, but the big bold lines.
I need to change myself.
Yeah, big bold lines on the parsing chart.
there
And for those of you who are online, please look at your parsing chart before answering number 5.
so, okay, I got it.
If you came up with 17, you are wrong. There are not that many sections. If you came up with more than 7, you are wrong. All right. About how much more time do you guys need? Or do you think you're there?
I'm done.
You're there? Okay. So let me make sure I can grab my little pen here. Pen, 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 pen. I kind of wish that I could change the color of the felt tip pen, because red always makes things seem so angry. Yeah. Until you do all of your correcting in green, and then green seems like it's the angry one, and it just...
Oh, there we go.
All right, so which of the following cases will not be used to determine the meaning of a preposition? There were 2 correct answers. Somebody give me at least one of them.
A.
A, nominative, is one of those 2 correct answers. The nominative will never determine the meaning of a preposition. Prepositions are never tied to the nominative. What's another one?
E, vocative.
E, vocative. Yes, that is the other one. You don't usually have prepositions when you're addressing someone. In good sir. That's just weird. Yeah, not quite right. So yeah, either A or E, nominative or vocative. Those ones are never going to determine the meaning of a preposition in Koine Greek. Not too bad. Yeah. But the genitive, the dative, and the accusative, they will. All right, number 2. A word that goes with a noun will usually match it in A, B, or C. What'd you guys get?
C.
C. You are correct. Case number in gender is exactly what I was looking for. And I kind of gave away the farm with putting article in there because, well, who's to say that the other word isn't an article, or it is an article, or yeah. So yeah, that kind of gave it away. But articles are still confusing in Greek, so hey. All right, number 3. What is the case of the word a? And if we're going to mess up on this one, this is probably where it's going to be, just because our brains are still mush from all this. All right, so let's go through and just kind of break it down a little bit. We have 8. Let's look for, so we have our verb first. Now we're going to ask ourselves, nominative, who's responsible for the eating?
The bird.
The bird. So the bird, both of those are going to get nominatives.
Okay.
So we know it's definitely not nominative because we already found the nominatives. So A is not that. And then next thing we look for is the accusatives. The accusatives are the thing that are receiving the action. So what is it that was eaten?
It's a fish.
A fish.
Or yes.
So now we have what the answer is. We don't have to go any further.
Okay. So
It's the accusative.
Right. Okay,
That's
good.
what I said.
I got it right. Phew. Yes.
Yep, it is the accusative.
It is the accusative?
Mm-hmm.
It's a single fish.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay.
It's part of what's.
What are you stopped on?
Yeah.
I'm really confused because I said B.
You said B? Genitive?
Yeah. Okay.
Genitive usually shows possession or derivation, so that'd be like my or your
Okay.
or
So
its.
A is like a number of fish, right? It's like a single fish. I mean, that's English, I know, I'm sorry.
Well, okay, what are you referring to with A?
The word, it's a fish.
Oh, the
It's just
indefinite
one-
article A?
Yeah, it's just
Okay.
one fish.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, what is the case of the word? Oh,
A.
I was doing the wrong thing. I was doing the word ate.
Oh, it's
Oh.
the verb, he told us.
I know, but
Okay.
I don't know why oh wow, okay.
You've been thinking too hard for too long.
Yeah, I really have, okay.
So what I'm hearing is take the next part slow.
Yeah.
Oh, honey, you do not even know. Okay, so that's
Just kind of coast into the next part of the lesson.
I don't know why. Yeah, okay, just my brain did somewhere. And
There's a
was
big A
probably-
on the front of 8. Maybe that's what you were focusing on.
I think so. I don't know what I was thinking. Okay.
Okay, that's fine. It happens. I understand. I can't imagine what it would have been like if I had taken quizzes as I was teaching myself Greek. I probably would have flunked most of the early ones. I'm pretty sure that I would have. See, this is why you learn it first, and then you take the quizzes, and then you look good. Yeah. All right, number 4. And this one I gave away the farm on, so sorry about that. But is it appropriate to translate the deterministic relative pronoun, the DRP, as just the word was?
No.
No. Can you guys tell me why?
Because was is a verb.
It's a verb. A deterministic relative pronoun is not a verb. So you can never have one be just translated as the other. You might have to put in words to help it out, but it can never be just that on itself because it's not one of those. It's not a verb. Although, yes, I still like the answer D. I thought that was pretty good.
Mm,
All right, and then number 5. There are how many sections in Mounce's parsing code? 5. Cinco de Mayo. A day late.
yeah. Oh, well.
There are 5. Okay. So, how did you guys do? How many of you guys got at least 3 out of 4?
I got 5.
I got 3 out of 4 of the first ones, but then I did get the bonus question.
Okay, so 4 out of 4, 4 out of 4. And hanging bonuses. Nice.
So who got the star last?
I think Mac took it home.
See, that's a worry that you online people just do not have. You don't have to worry about who's got the star. Fantastic. All right, so the quiz is done. We can move on to new things. And this is what we're going to be discussing for the next however long we're on this. No guarantees that we'll get it all done today, but that's what we're going to be talking about. Adjectival degrees, adjectival functions, and the DRP. We'll probably at least be able to get through that tonight. That usually doesn't take too long. The first 2, I think we will. And then 3 personal pronouns. Might be able to squish it in, maybe. 4 demonstrative and relative pronouns. Probably not.
Definitely not.
I don't think so. Yeah. So let's at least shoot for sections 1 and 2. Possibly 3. All right, so number 1, adjectival degrees. And these are things that we actually usually are relatively familiar with English, so it's not as bad as some of the other stuff that we've done. Although we don't usually use as technical a language about it, but we are used to it.
So they really are descriptives.
Yes, yes they are. So let's go ahead and define some terms first. So an adjective, some people say adjective. If you want to, that's fine, but I don't, so forgive me if you don't like it. I always say adjective.
Me too.
Same here.
Okay, we're all on the same page then. All right, so an adjective is a word that differentiates, limits, describes, or qualifies a noun. So for example, words like bright, yellow, small, strong. These are adjectives. And a Greek adjective works a lot of the same ways that an English adjective does, fortunately. Now, it can be in weird places in the Greek sentence because everything's in a weird order in Greek, but the function is basically the same. Right, next, adjectives vary in the degree of difference that they emphasize. It's not the same thing to say big cat as biggest cat. Big cat just says there's a difference about this cat. Biggest cat says something very specific about that kind of difference. It's not just a kind of difference, but it's a very specific kind of difference. Okay, so the degree of difference is something that we always have to look out for. And let's talk about those degrees of difference. The positive degree simply marks a key difference. So for example, I live in a house versus I live in a small house. There is a key difference that exists, but we don't know how extreme it is, and we don't have anything else really to compare it to. It's just a difference exists, and this is the kind of difference that there is.
But is small positive?
It's called the positive degree. And some people are just being snarky. Okay.
Small is positive when it comes to cleaning.
Yeah, that's true.
All depends on the perspective.
Very true.
Yeah. All right, and then the comparative, which in the parsing code will be period C. You'll have the rest of the parsing code, and then at the end of it will be .c for comparative in the parsing code. It distinguishes between 2 items that share a key difference. So for example, I live in the smaller house. Just because it has the end ER on there, I know that I'm talking about 2 houses in comparison, and that I'm talking about the one that is the smaller of the 2. I live in the smaller house.
Only with 2.
Yeah. Comparative only has 2 items in mind.
Okay, so you said in the parsing code something? What the
It's
parsing
just
code?
over here.
Yeah. Yeah, with comparative, in the parsing code, it'll tell you by putting a little .c at the end of the parsing code.
Oh, that'll be at the very end of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You go through the entire parsing code, and then at the end, there'll be this little .c to tell you this is comparative.
Okay.
And then something similar happens with the superlative. It gets a little .s at the end of the parsing code. And it marks an item as the most extreme member of its category. So for example, if I say, I live in the smallest house, I'm saying you can take all of the houses, and mine is going to be the most extreme member in that category that meets the definition of small. It's the smallest one. So it's not just 2 anymore, it's everything. Yep. Now, one thing that makes things kind of, on one hand, it's actually really convenient. It is also a little bit annoying, but it's really convenient is that in Koine Greek, the superlative was actually being absorbed by the comparative. So they usually actually wind up translating as exactly the same. Yeah. Yeah. So in the Greek, it'll say comparative, it'll say superlative, but you could actually translate them both as an ER ending if you wanted to. A lot of times.
Okay, which was the ER?
The ER is the comparative normally, and EST is superlative.
Okay,
but in Koine Greek, superlative was being absorbed by the comparative, so there's really no difference between the two,
okay.
and a lot of times,
So
a lot of cases.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we don't need to worry about the. Okay.
Yeah. So there's lots of times in the Greek where you could make the argument for it being superlative or being comparative basically just on context, and that will be your better guide than what the actual parsing code says, because grammatically it's a superlative. Contextually, they're only talking about 2 things, so that's comparative.
So that's how you figure it out.
Is context. Context is going to be much more helpful than what it formally is. And this is just a part of Koine Greek. Like we said before, was kind of a Pidgin or Creole language. It wasn't formally a Pidgin or Creole language, but it had a lot of those attributes. You know, it was a language that was taken on by people that did not originally speak that language, and they didn't always deal with things formally. It's like when people come into an English-speaking country and they have to learn comparatives and superlatives, and they don't always get it. They'll use the EST ending for something that they really mean ER for, and vice versa. Koine Greek was the exact same thing. You had these people, Koine Greek was not their original language. It was thrust on them by the Greeks. And so they start using these words, and grammatically it might have been a superlative, but they were only talking about 2 things. And so you're listening to them going, I don't think that's what you meant, but I get what you're saying.
Right.
And that's basically how it was. So context is going to be your best guide.
Okay.
Greek formally does have positive, comparative, and superlative degrees. But because it's kind of a Pidgin Creole language thing, you always want to check it with your context just to make sure.
Why are you calling it a Pidgin Creole?
That's what the language is called. A Pidgin or a Creole language is a language that has basically been thrust upon a group.
Ah.
It's not their first language. It's a language that's been kind of forced on them.
Okay.
And so they learn to use it because they need to, but...
Because that happened with the Mexicans, basically, when the Spanish came in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and so Mexican Spanish and formal Spanish are not the same thing.
Okay, because I've heard of the Creole Spanish and I was kind of wondering, like, now I get it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I can... I won't get into all that, but yeah.
That's fine. Yeah,
But yeah, that's basically what's happening. So grammatically, there is a distinction between all of these, but context is always going to be your best guide.
Okay.
Because sometimes they'll say one when they really mean the other. And it's not so much that they really meant the other, it's just that in the common use of the language, they just weren't formal about the distinction.
Okay.
It was perfectly acceptable at that time and place to use a superlative where you really meant a comparative, and vice versa.
And I know there's some people that don't speak good English that I have talked with, and you can tell that they're saying something comparative. You know they're saying something comparative because of the context of what they're saying, even though they're using superlative.
Mm-hmm.
And so you translate it in your mind because you know what they're really trying to say.
Yeah.
And I tend to try to correct them. I don't know if that helps or not.
As a teacher, they don't always appreciate it.
Yeah.
And it always has to do, as far as language development in history, it always has to do with if it's functional or not. If it's functional for the people that are using it, and they can figure out what they mean without making a distinction, they'll keep doing it. And that's the way that Koine Greek was. It was thrust upon them early on by the Greeks, but hundreds of years later, they still figured out what each other was talking about, so they didn't bother making a difference out of it.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so let's do a little bit of translation. Yakubu tu Mikru. I've given you the first one. Yakubu is what we usually translate as James. It's actually more like Jacobus. Or you could say Jacob. That would actually be appropriate too. And then to is another form of the DRP, which we've been dealing with all the time.
Okay.
So we've kind of like beat that one into the ground. We know that one pretty good.
The, he, who is, and all that kind of stuff. Right?
All that fun. The last word is the word that we want to focus on here. Mikru, in the parsing code and in the thing I actually kind of put it in a different color for us. This is the adjective. This is what we're worried about. And you'll notice that at the end of it, it doesn't have any .c or .s, which means it's not comparative, it's not superlative, it's just a basic form of an adjective. It's just the positive degree. So we'll go ahead and we'll look up 3625 in the interlinear, and we'll try to figure out.
In the big one?
Yep. We'll go ahead and look up 3625, and we'll try to figure out what this is saying about James. Because we know it's talking about James. It's an adjective, so it's going to describe James. How are they describing him?
Hmm. 3625, you said?
Yep, 3625.
I'm looking at 30. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong word.
Okay,
Don't do that.
little, small in size, young, not an adult. So which one would it be?
Well, that's kind of what we have to put together now. We know that it's describing James. So do we think of James as being small in size? James the little? Is it James the young?
Who James?
That we don't know.
That's how I would know if he's little or not. Or if he's young, or if he's just small in
Little
stature.
in number. There's only one of them.
As a general adjective, it's basically little or young, and we have to figure out which one of those is going to be best for this context.
A adjective. So G.
Yeah, all of these are genitive. It's all a part of a genitive phrase.
That didn't help me figure it out.
Nope.
Something over from.
Yeah, all of them are like that, though.
Very short. Very short.
How many of us think it's short?
Who is?
James the short.
Maybe it's young.
James who is. I think it's James who is young.
You think young?
I'm thinking young.
Okay.
Just
Not an adult.
Well, you were right too.
Young. Well, I read down through there some more and saw the word young.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, young is appropriate in this one.
Now, how do we know that it was appropriate?
Because I'm telling you. But contextually, okay, so one of the options that you had on there, what were some of the other options you had?
Well, there was small in size, little, short.
Okay, do we know of any James in the Bible that we actually know of
That
being
was
described as
small
being short?
Small in stature. No,
No, we
that's
don't.
what I was thinking.
Just
Yes.
We do have one person who was famous for being short, and that was Zacchaeus.
Yes.
And we know that he was short because he had to climb up in the tree.
Yes.
But otherwise, we don't really know of anyone else that was described as being short.
Kind of a process of elimination in a way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So this would be, of James.
Yeah, because it's all genitive, so you have to have the of in there. And then we have DRP elevation going on here. We have the DRP and we have the young, but we don't have any noun for it to modify, so we have to throw in our own noun for it to modify, so one. So of James, the young one. In older translations, it'll say James the less, and it won't say less in which way, less in height or less in age. It'll just say James the less, which is a nice, very politically correct way of saying it. We're not sure which way he was less, it's just less.
So why did you say of James?
Because all of these are genitives.
And genitives need a declaration, more or less.
They need something to tell you that it's showing possession
Yes.
or
So it
or
belongs.
derivation.
Genitives need to show possession.
Yeah, genitives are possessives or things from which other things progress, descend.
Yes, just
So the rest of this phrase could have been something like the mother of James, the young one, or the father of James, the young one, or the sibling of James, the young one.
This is just a phrase.
This is just a phrase. This isn't a whole sentence.
Okay, that's where I
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so this would be connected to something else, because genitives by themselves don't really mean a whole lot of things. They need something to modify.
That's what I was trying to get at, because I know the other ones we were trying to figure out. It was so complete. Okay, there we go. That makes sense.
Yeah, this is just a little phrase. Okay, so there's that. Let's try another one on for size here. Say luta de ta charismata ta mezana. So let's go through and actually get a little bit more useful stuff out of it here. So the verb, you are to desire, and you'll notice that it has a pronoun on it, which means that we are not going to have a nominative here.
Oh, I just made that one.
Okay, so
Sorry.
pronoun.
Yeah, if you have a pronoun that's implied in the verb, you're not going to have a nominative.
Roll that down my notes.
Yeah, and if you do wind up having a nominative, it will replace whatever the implied
So we just
pronoun
have
is,
it
but
in
we'll
the
get to
noun
that.
then.
So instead of starting out by looking for the nominative, which is what we normally do, we're going to start out by looking for the accusative. We already know who's responsible for this. We already know who's doing the desiring. You are to desire.
So
But you are to desire what? That's what we're going to be looking at.
Could be the accusative.
gift is
That'll be the accusative.
and the DRP goes with it.
Actually, you'll notice that all of those are in the accusative.
Oh, they sure are.
Every single one of them. So that entire thing, whatever that entire phrase right there is, that is what is being desired.
Oh, the whole thing is.
The whole thing is what is being desired.
Oh.
Yeah. So we're going to have to go through and figure this out. Now, we already have gift in there. That's given to you. The main thing that we're going to be focused on, though, I'll give you most of the rest of it. The main thing we're going to be focused on is that adjective, because that's what we're talking about right here. And this adjective actually has the .c on it, which tells you that grammatically it is what?
It is
It's a comparative. Now, does that mean that it's actually going to function that way in conversation?
not necessarily.
Not necessarily, but grammatically it's a comparative.
Be the best gift. Just guessing.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and look that up, 3489.
Okay, this one says great, well, actually it says great, large in size, great, much or numerous, great, grown-up adult, great, vehement, intense, sumptuous, important, weighty.
You usually want to stick with the ones that are closer to the top of the list rather than at the
Oh,
end.
okay.
Most of the time. There's of course exceptions to that. But normally the first ones are going to be more useful than the later ones.
Like that megas, like as in mega.
No, I'm thinking just you want to desire. What kind of a gift are you to desire? I don't think it has anything to do with size. I think it has more to do with being great. Not
Yeah.
large in size, just great.
Like awesome.
Yeah.
And it would actually really depend on what you mean by gift. Are you actually talking about a physical gift that you hand to someone, or are you talking about a gift like, say, in Corinthians where it talks about the spiritual gifts, which you'd have a really hard time handing off to someone?
Right. But the you are to desire part of it tells me it's something that we really want to get from God.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
That would be a pretty
it's
safe
not
assumption.
A number
Probably not.
or a size.
Probably not.
Yeah.
That's
So what are you guys thinking for this one?
Importance or something, high importance.
something of importance. Yeah.
So what you guys thinking for it?
Important, I would say important.
Important?
Or
That probably wouldn't be terrible.
magnificent,
Have that of
extraordinary.
high importance.
Yeah, wouldn't be wrong.
Oh, but it's gotta be an ER, so the highest,
Oh, yeah.
that is the highest importance, higher importance.
All right, so we have at least a little bit of an idea of what it's going to be. I'll go ahead and fill it in for you, but at least we've got a little bit of an idea. Now, I will give you guys a little bit kind of a bonus lesson here. You have the de right here that in this context means but. Greek is really weird with how it handles its conjunctions. Conjunctions can never, and this is a weird thing, it can never be the first word in a clause, which is so incredibly weird because that's always how it is in English.
Yes.
So the conjunction, you will always forward. You'll always put it out in front because that's how we do it in English. So the but is going to have to be in front. So, but you are to desire, and then these things that follow. And then the TAs, the deterministic relative pronouns, the DRPs, those we'll have to kind of figure out a little bit too. But one thing that we do need to make sure that we have our attention on is whether the gift here that we're talking about is singular or plural. You always want to make sure you check that.
Oh.
What are these ones going to be? Is it going to be a gift or is it going to be gifts?
So do you look up the
Look at the parsing codes on these.
Plural.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a plural gift.
It's plural gifts.
Okay.
So we're not going to say the gift for the DRP. It would be the gifts.
The gifts. Okay, but you are to desire the
Something gifts.
the
gifts.
The best, the most important gifts.
Well, that would kind of be out of order for the Greek. So I'll go ahead and give it to you guys.
The most important.
This is
these.
Yep. So you are to desire these gifts,
Yes.
the greater ones.
Okay.
Greater would be formal because it's comparative. You might also have to look at the context and say, is there anything else that this could be compared to? It might be greatest depending on the context, but grammatically it's greater. Or the highest, or however you wanted to, higher, however you wanted to do that.
But you said comparative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's the .c.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay, sorry. I got the suffix wrong.
Well, that's okay. In Koine Greek, it could be either one. Just look at the context and figure out from there. If it's talking about out of a really long list of gifts that it could be talking about, greatest is probably appropriate. But if it's only out of like two groups of gifts, there's these gifts over here and these gifts over here, it would be greater. Because you're talking about two groups.
And because that's got a DRP on it, after the word but, which one of those did we change? Which one of those did we change to use these?
Okay, so the first DRP was these.
Okay.
The second DRP
Is the. Oh, okay.
Now you could have said the gifts, the greater ones. That would have been appropriate. These is it makes a little bit more sense, yeah.
Okay.
Desire these gifts, and then the rest of it is describing those gifts. It's the adjectival phrase, the greater ones.
These and those.
Yep. And of course, there was no noun after that adjective. Go away.
Oh, these updates.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, there was no noun after that adjective, so we had to provide a noun. Ones, the greater ones. And that's why I translated it that way. Now, normally when this gets translated in English, they will greatly simplify it, and they'll just say, desire the greater gifts.
That's pretty simple.
It's really simple. Yeah. But the Greek is technically a little bit more complex than that. But you are to desire these gifts, the greater ones. Yeah. And this was taken from Corinthians. This is Paul writing it, and he tends to, like I said, he does this, it's a little bit more on the formal side, but mostly it's just stream of consciousness stuff. So he goes on and saying, but you should desire this, which is qualified by this, which is like this, which talks about this. And it really is. It's stream of consciousness when you do go with Paul. And it makes interpreting Paul really, really, really hard. It's not because it's super formal. It's not like doing Luke, where Luke has this really, 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 really formal sense. Like you said, doctor. It's not quite like that. It's just the stream of consciousness thing that makes it so hard to follow. It's just like, Paul, sentences, complete sentences. He speaks dashedly. All right. So questions about that?
You make it sound easy when we do them together.
It's always easier that way, right?
Okay, so in the Greek, it's not giving you what you need to translate it into English. And so there's certain things that you just have to know to help you with those, like the DRPs, to know what we need to add and don't add. Like you said, ones, it needed to be added because after the adjective there was no
noun for it to modify, so you just had a hanging adjective.
So you had to.
So that's what we called in the last lesson DRP elevation.
DRP elevation. Okay.
Yeah. If you don't have a noun for that adjective to go with, you need to put in something to hold its place. So you usually put in the pronoun one, like the great one.
Okay.
Is it always one, or
It would be if it could be singular or plural, things like that.
Okay.
So if you're talking about more than one, it would be ones, the great ones, the young ones.
So it's always going to be ones after that?
No, not necessarily.
Okay,
Just
there you go.
make sure that it makes
I thought
sense.
you were saying it was, and I was like,
No.
how does that work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just make it fit the context. Like we said at the beginning of this, context is always going to be your chief guide.
Okay.
Yeah. Context.
Make it fit the context.
Are we ready for the next
You
slide?
betcha.
Woohoo! So we got done with the first part, getting right into the second part, streaming along. So we'll talk about adjectival functions and the DRP. Woohoo!
Dreaming along or screaming along?
Well, it depends. All right. If it makes you feel good. Yeah. Yeah, that's probably not good philosophy there. At least not biblical. Adjectives have 3 basic functions. And this is where things get a little bit confusing. Well, that's just Greek in general. But this is where they start using the very scholarly grammatical language, and you're just like, we don't use those words. So yeah, you're going to have to learn a little bit of vocab here.
I do know that.
An adjective is an attributive when it modifies a noun. Basically, when it acts like a normal adjective. That's what the attributive is.
It's
So
attributes of.
yeah, attributes of. And in English, we usually put it in front of the noun that it's modifying. So the dog becomes the big dog. We use big to describe the dog. We put it in front of the dog. That's the normal order for an adjective in English. Attributive is basically normal adjective. That's at least how I think of it.
An adjective is an attributive when it modifies a noun.
You're saying something about the attributes of whatever it is.
Yes, describing
Yes.
the dog. Okay.
Yep. It's this kind of dog.
Because it could also be. Oh, I put it in the wrong spot. So it could be like the brown dog or the lazy.
The yellow dog, the dead dog, the living dog.
Yes, right.
Yep. Yeah. Just basically a normal adjective qualifying the dog in some way, shape, or form. Right. And then there's the substantival, and that is the one that stands in for a noun. We don't have a whole lot of these in English, but there is that fairly famous phrase, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's a case where we're using adjectives to stand in for nouns. What we really mean is the good ones, the bad ones, the ugly ones. In Greek, that's what we call the DRP elevation. There is no proper noun there, so you have to throw something in there to fill it out. That's a substantival.
So that ones is an example of a substantival.
Yes. Basically, there is no noun, so you have to supply something to fill the noun's place. And the adjective is there to tell you that there is something that you're going to have to fill in. It's describing something, it just doesn't tell you what the something is, so you have to fill the something in.
Yeah, the attributive was good to wrap your brain around. This one's a little harder.
Yeah. So basically, a substantival is an attributive that doesn't have a noun. It's modifying something, but we don't have a noun to modify.
You have to add one.
You have to add one, or at least a pronoun.
Yes.
Yep. Attributive, normal adjective, substantival, it's an adjective without a noun. All right, then last but not least, certainly not least, is the predicate. An adjective is a predicate when it asserts something about a noun. And the way that makes sense for me is to think of forms of the word is. So for example, the man is good, the man was good, the man will be good. You're still describing the man, but you have to put some kind of verb of being in there. You're asserting something about that person. This is that. That was that other thing.
And see, I just teach those as an adjective after the noun. Like the bird is fast, the cow is fat. Something.
Yeah, except in Greek it can be reversed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, in Greek you could have good is the man, which wouldn't be good English, but it would be considered just fine in Greek. So yeah, attributive is basically a normal adjective with a noun. Substantival is a normal adjective, but it doesn't have the noun. And then predicate is when you have some form of the word is thrown in there.
Okay.
Of the word is. A predicate is a verb.
In English.
I'm doing okay to this one, John.
Yeah. Yeah. Except in Greek, then you can have an adjective that's a predicate. Yeah. Yeah, that was another thing that was hard to get used to when I was learning Greek. It's like, I know all of these words, but they're not using them in the same way.
Yeah.
That's not a predicate. That is not what I was taught in grammar school.
Right.
But no, they said, no, it's a predicate. What? You weird people. All right. So those are the three basic functions. Say what?
A fat DRP.
Where are you talking about?
Number 2, you say a fat DRP.
A fat DRP.
I don't know what you're talking. Oh, you're talking about the title.
Yes, it's a fat DRP.
If that helps you remember, okay.
Sorry.
Moving on.
Yeah.
All right. E. When the DRP is present, its position will help you determine the function of the adjective. If it's not present, then you're going to have to rely on context. But if it is present, it'll tell you how things are working out. The two main things that you need to keep in mind is DRP in front of the adjective and then DRP in front of the noun. Those are the two basic distinctions that you'll have in Greek. Either the DRP will be in front of the adjective or the DRP will be in front of the noun.
Okay, so.
I'm writing nothing. Sorry. Well, DRP in front of noun.
DRP in front of adjective.
Yeah, if the DRP is in front of the adjective, it's going to want to function like a normal adjective. And it will if there's a noun to modify. That's what the first one is about. It'll be the normal attributive, it'll be a normal adjective if it has a noun to modify.
Okay.
If there is no noun to modify, well, you're going to have to throw one in. That's the substantival.
Okay.
So your little chart is the order of the words in the sentences.
Exactly.
DRP, adjective, noun, attributive. Its function is attributive.
Mm-hmm.
DRP, adjective,
No
no
noun.
noun. You have to add one.
You have to add something to
Add
fill
something.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
One is just an example.
Add one noun, not the word, yeah.
Yeah. But add something in there to fill
Add
the
a
place.
DRP, noun, adjective.
Is the first predicate position, which is the normal predicate for us in English. That's why it's called predicate 1.
Okay.
So the man is good, basically. And then predicate 2 reverses the normal English order, be good is the man.
Now I'm really confused. Okay.
Okay.
As long as you can remember that when the DRP is in front of the adjective, it wants to act like a normal adjective, you'll be safe. And when the DRP is in front of the noun, that means you're going to have to throw the word is in there somewhere. And this is why when we did our translation of the Beatitudes, that one phrase from the Beatitudes, blessed are the persecuted, you had to throw that are in there because you had a predicate. You had a predicate adjective there. The blessed was out here in front. It was this one right here. Stupid thing.
That's right.
That
Blessed
work with me.
are. And we put those in for our determiner.
Yeah. So in the case of blessed are those who are persecuted, the adjective was blessed. And then you had the DRP, those who are, and then the noun, well,
Persecuted.
basically it was technically it was a participle acting as a noun.
Okay.
But yeah, so persecuted. So blessed, those who are persecuted, you have to put in the verb in there to make it make sense. And so in predicates, you're always going to throw some version of the word is in there. In this, because it was plural, it was are. Blessed are those who are persecuted. So yeah, we've already seen an example where you have the second predicate. And then the first predicate is what normal English would be. So we're not going to mess with that too much, but yeah, it's there.
What's normal English then? I guess I don't understand.
In normal English, we would usually put the adjective after the verb. So we would say, those who are persecuted are blessed.
Ah.
Yeah, that wasn't the Greek order, and so we didn't do it in that order. But yeah. Actually, because of the influence of the Bible and it being translated fairly literalistically into English, English kind of started adopting some of those practices where we have adjectives out in front. Yeah, it's actually amazing how much a translation of the Bible will influence a language. In English, the King James had a massive influence on the English language, and then Luther's German Bible had a massive influence on the German language as well. Just whenever you get that early translation, the first early one that becomes widely disseminated and popular, it winds up becoming just it winds up influencing language a whole lot.
It becomes more of the standard than...
Exactly. People start judging their language by that, by what is in there. Even if that wasn't the intention of the translators, they were doing things, they thought they were doing things out of order to capture what the original Greek order was. People looked at it and said, well, it's a good translation, so it must be good English. Well, go with that.
It's in the Bible.
It's in the Bible, so it must be okay. Yeah. So it's amazing how much you'll get borrowing over in a language just because of those kinds of things. Yeah, the Bible's had a massive influence on a lot of different languages. All right, let's do some translation now.
Tell us what these words mean.
And I accidentally already put that one on the screen, but I'll go ahead and take it back. All right, so we have the attributive. We have the DRP out in front of the adjective. So this means it's going to function like a normal adjective would be. So if you guys were just to translate it as is, what would you say?
A good man.
You wouldn't say a good man because there is no indefinite article in Greek.
So the good man.
The good man.
There you go.
Okay,
Or that
so
good
that
man.
was pretty easy then, right?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, it could be the good man, that good man. You wouldn't say he who is a good man. That would not make a whole lot of sense. Yeah, but the good man, that good man.
He who is a good man.
Oh my God.
But then you throw in an indefinite article. You doubled up on your determiners. You can't do that.
Okay, so the good man or that good man, right?
Yeah, the good man or that good man would be your primary options. Okay, so that's normal attributive. Functions like a normal adjective does in English. Pretty straightforward.
Okay.
All right. Substantival. We have the same order there. We have the DRP in front of the adjective, but we've got this gaping hole.
We don't have a noun.
We don't have a noun for it to modify. So it wants to modify something, wants to do the normal thing, it just doesn't have anything to modify.
Say the good one.
Yeah.
The good dog. Probably not. Or,
It would depend on context, yeah.
But
We don't have a
one
whole
could
lot.
be anything.
But
right?
one could be anything, and that's why we usually use it in English for our
Kind of a generic
substantivals, yeah. It's a good generic word. So yeah, the good something, you take your best guess at what the something is, or try to fill it in with a fairly generic pronoun like one, which is what I usually prefer to do.
you're safe.
Yep, pretty safe. And then predicate one, first predicate position that we're used to in English. Yeah, we have to add an is, but what tells us that it's predicate is that we have the DRP in front of the noun this time.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, if the DRP is in front of the adjective, it's normal adjective. If the DRP is in front of the noun, then that tells us we're dealing with a predicate situation. You're going to have to throw the word is in there somewhere.
So we could say the man is good.
The man is good.
The man is good. Yep. Yeah, and I tried to italicize the words that I'm throwing in there just to let you know that these are supplied words. I don't know how well that comes across into handwriting, though. I mean, you might have to circle it or something. I don't know. Underline it, double underline. Circle in box.
There you go.
How did Harold at the Stockley is festival? I suppose it depends on how you have to do certain things.
All right, so we have the attributive, Normal adjective, the good man. Substantival, it's a lot like the attributive, except you're actually lacking the noun, so you have to put something in its place. And then predicate 1, you have the DRP in front of the noun this time, so that tells you you're going to have to throw in some version of the word is in there, so the man is good. And then the last one is kind of a strange one. You have the DRP in front of the noun, and you have the DRP in front of the adjective. So you have a predicate and substantival, because this one doesn't have a noun on it, right?
Just got confused.
I think I know this one.
What do you think?
Good man.
The man who is good.
The man who is good is actually a lot of times how I would translate it. However, that's not considered the formal translation for this one.
Okay.
Instead, the way that this one would be formally translated, you look up at people like Wallace and whatnot, and they actually they do it with dashes. They would say, the man, the good one.
Oh.
Yeah, or the man.
And this, like I said, this is me.
Okay.
And the reason why I like the man who is good is because in Greek, they wouldn't pause for the agathos. And so they would say it all together in one continuous statement. The meaning, though, is closer to what Wallace would do with the man, the good one. And that's Dr. Daniel Wallace, by the way. And then there is Mounce, who just takes this and he makes it into an attributive. Just a normal attributive. And that's how Mounce does it.
I don't see the adjective first here. Your little chart says the adjective is first.
In a normal attributive, right?
And then, no, the very last one, it says an adjective first, then the DRP, then a noun. We have to add an is.
Okay, let me go back here. What are we talking about?
That last one there.
Yeah.
It says an adjective first.
Mm-hmm. This is the second predicate. We don't have the second predicate. What we're talking about here is the second attributive,
Okay.
which is not on that chart.
Gotcha. I'm looking at the chart thinking, where
It's not on there.
did it go?
He didn't
Yeah, this
do
is-
that, I just kind of ignored it.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't
This
say
is a combination of this one and this one.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a, whoops, no.
We
It's
had
not
a
attributive.
DRP.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Substantival.
It's okay. So
Yeah, you have the DRP with the noun.
And then the man.
That's predicate. You have the DRP with the adjective. That's substantival.
Okay.
So this part would be normal predicate. This would be normal substantival. But of course, this predicate doesn't have its adjective to work with.
So you have to.
So that's why Wallace winds up doing it dashedly, because it basically breaks the flow. Normally it would be ha anthropos agathos without the DRP in there. And so it would be normally the man who is good. Or sorry, the man is good, I'm sorry.
Okay.
The man is good, just like we did with our first predicate up here. Okay, it'd normally be like that if we didn't have this DRP in the way, right?
Okay.
But since the DRP is in the way, we have to break it up. And that's what Wallace is doing with putting in the dash.
So that's the formal way.
That's the formal way.
And then to make it more common is the U way.
Just to make it flow more like it would in the original
More of a
Greek,
flow, okay.
I would say the man who is good.
Okay.
And that also maintains the predicate attribute as well. But Mounce, he really simplifies it and just says, do it as another attributive.
I like you.
Yeah, Mounce simplifies things, but sometimes it's a little oversimplified. But yeah,
Okay.
There's a
so
reason why he
Mounce
teaches-
just keeps it simple.
Mounce keeps it really simple. He says, basically, if you have this substantival in there with the predicate, just treat it all as an attributive. Say the good man.
Oh, okay. So he just kind of goes up there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Takes everything and goes, we're going to put it up and keep it simple.
really, really, really simple.
So that could be good in one way, but it might not be good in another way,
Hmm.
depending on what's the context is.
Well, it's usually not going to change the meaning a whole lot. I mean, even in saying these, you have the man, the good one, with the dashes in there. The man who is good, the good man. It all kind of means the same thing.
Yeah.
Who is a good one?
Yeah. So,
In
yeah, there's
this case, but could it be something different in another case?
not usually.
Okay.
Not usually, yeah. This is more so an issue of trying to match the original style, like we said. You know, the original person said, "Would that gentleman please move his vehicle from the premises?"
Okay.
Move your car, bud.
So
You know, that's
Wallace
basically the
is
difference here.
Formal.
Yeah,
Noun
Wallace gives a formal.
And
Mounts is very, very, very simple,
very simple.
and I'm kind of in
In
between.
here in between. Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay.
Yeah, technically it really means the man, the good one. That would be what is actually being said there. But
Okay.
your chances of doing that in translation and anyone actually understanding your translation is pretty much nil. It's not going to happen. It's not going to be.
I'm still good to you.
Yeah. Well, most of them make
You know.
pretty much complete sentence. It's fine. All right, and then personal pronouns. Yeah, we could probably cover that, but I don't want to push it. Let's leave 9 minutes early and call it good. All right, so.
What you're going to do for me for Mother's Day, John?
What are you going to do for her?
She's going to sit down and
Teach Greek.
Help her with homework?
fill in the blanks in my mind.
All right, let's talk about homework here.
How much of it can we do?
We got the first couple of sections done, so that I don't know how much we could actually do with just 2 sections, because most of the lesson is actually dedicated to the personal pronouns. Yeah, I don't want you guys doing any of the translation work, so 15 through 18 is definitely out. We don't have enough to do that. 5 through 14, you could probably do a few of them, but no. You could answer number 1.
Woohoo!
You could answer number 2. Yeah, that's about it. We'll do 1 and 2.
1 and 2?
Woohoo! 1 and 2, yeah. That'll be a hard assignment right there.
Man.
I could probably answer those right now. Well, I think it is.
Well, number 2 will take a little bit more explanation. But yeah, other than that, that should be pretty straightforward. Any parting questions that the online audience might benefit from?
Like I said, you had me till you got to letter I.
And then the world just
And
kind of
then
came
I
apart.
kinda went, Yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta learn your terms. I mean, I know adjectives, but calling them those different things is a little different.
And using words that we normally use for something else.
Yeah, predicates.
Yeah.
Thinking of a predicate now as a
And now is a type of adjective.
would be different.
Yep.
Predicate is a type of action.
Yeah.
Okay.
But more of this made sense to me than determinatives.
Determiners and nouns, yeah. The cases mess with people.
Yes, because those cases.
They're a case.
They are.
Yeah.
All right, see you online, people. Good luck.
Bye.